It's been asked if my slides will be available. Yes, everything that I present today will be available, including we've got guidebooks and additional resources for you guys. If that's of interest to you, go ahead and put your information on this. Sarah insisted on bringing the sparkly clipboard. I apologize in advance. And we'll get you emailed over everything that we need or that you guys need to help kind of provide some of this information. So our objective today is to help empower you guys so that as you're going through this in your own life, as you're going to talk to your students about this, you guys have resources available to know questions that need to be asked, kind of help students get a good frame of reference as to where to be going and things they can be doing today to plan for the inevitable retirement that hopefully comes at some point in their life. So as with everything that we're going to be talking about today, it's always intended for high-level audience purposes only. Make sure you always consult your tax, legal, or investment advisor before making any specific changes to your own specific situation. A little bit about myself. I'm a National Social Security advisor. I got my MBA from Purdue. I am a licensed fiduciary, an investment advisor, a partner in a group with Alliance Wealth Advisors. No one really cares about any of this, but this is a much younger version of myself. I know a lot of you guys are like, wow, he got old and fat, but it happens, okay? No, I was about 21 years old when this picture was taken, and I was working my first real job when I was up at college, up at Utah State. Any Aggies in the room? A couple of us, yeah. I'd say represent, but I think we kind of want to lay low for the time being, right? Sports teams haven't done anything recently. But I sat down with HR at this job, and they told me I had access to something called a 401k. Now, by raise of hands, has anyone ever heard of a 401k? Yeah, I hadn't. Thank you, financial literacy at Woods Cross High. And they told me that as long as I contributed a specific percentage of what I made, they would match that dollar for dollar. And I thought that sounded pretty awesome. And then she said, well, how much do you want to contribute? And I thought, I have no idea. She said, how about you call your dad and ask him? So I did. And I called him and I said, how much should I set aside? And he said 10% is good general rule of thumb. And so I worked there for the next couple of years. A couple of years later, I quit that job to pursue school full time. No sooner did I quit that job than the company's 401k administrator called me and told me because I was no longer an active employee, I couldn't be on their 401k plan anymore. And if I'm being completely honest, I forgot that I was even contributing to it. So I said, well, how much money is even in that account? And he said, well, there's about $9,000 today. Guys, my jaw literally hit the floor. $9,000 seemed like I had just won the lottery. I had never seen that amount of money before in my life. And to know that while I'm putting myself through school, I had $9,000 available to me was pretty amazing. And so I asked him, I said, well, what are my options with this? What can I do? And he said, shoot, if it's me, I cash that thing out, pay down some student loans, bankroll a semester or two, and if there's anything left over, take your girlfriend on a nice date. And I said, that sounds awesome. I see a couple people in the room like shaking their head no. The financial literacy teachers inside of you is like, no! And I said, that sounds amazing, sign me up. So he sent over the paperwork. I get it, guys, I'm in the future too. And I filled it out, and about 6 weeks later, that first check arrived, or that only check arrived, but the check was for about $4,500, not the $9,000 previously told me. So I started thinking, what on earth happened to the other half of the money? But then I remembered this conversation years earlier with HR where part of this was my contribution, part of this was the employer's contribution. Certainly I'm going to be getting a second check with the employer's contribution. Some wishful thinking, right? Decided to exercise some patience. Waited a couple days. Days turned to weeks. And about that month mark, I said, enough is enough. I've got to figure out what's going on here. So I called them up. I said, I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I only got $4,500 of the $9,000 that I was told that I had in this account. And I got this really sweet lady, Sue, on the other end of the phone who could tell I made this massive mistake. And she said, well, Ben, you know, not to be the bearer of bad news, but you did a lump sum distribution on a tax qualified account prior to 59.5. I said, Sue, slow down. I don't know what any of that means. She said, let's break this down for you. Because you're 23 years old today, you cannot access a tax-qualified retirement account without a penalty. You have to be at least 59 and a half. So I had no idea. She said, yeah, so that penalty was assessed. She said, furthermore, because this is a tax-qualified account, we withheld all of the taxes on this amount on the front end. So I don't know that I fully appreciate that either, but neither of those two amounts make up the full difference of 50% here, Sue. She said, I know, and this is the kicker. You were 2 months shy of the company's vesting period, and part of the employer's contribution was clawed back. I said, Sue, I'm doing just fine on my own. I'm scrimping and saving, and I've been able to get through with minimal student loans. Is it possible for me to write void on this check and send it back to you? What do you guys think she said?
Nope.
What's done is done. And she may have even inserted the word dummy there at the end. I'm not entirely positive. But I remember vividly sitting there in the library after hanging up that phone call thinking, my first real experience as an adult, and I lost $4,500. So I talked to a group of teachers and educators about this. Why on earth would I lead in a class with this story? What do you guys think? What's the parallel we can draw?
Start young.
Start young.
You did start young.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, okay? You guys are uniquely armed in a way that you can help these students understand how to avoid some of these mistakes. Now, we're gonna get into some of the concepts of time value of money, the rule of 72, and where that money would be at by retirement had I not made this bonehead mistake, okay? That could have been a monumental difference in my life. Now, as you guys have students coming in, it might be one of those situations where you say to yourself, well, hey, you know what, the onus is really on them. We're gonna go ahead and shift this. And I'm sure a lot of my teachers try to do a similar concept. The reality is, if I'm being honest, being in the seat that I am as an investment advisor, I would bet dollars to donuts most of my teachers didn't understand the same concept, okay? So the onus is actually on you guys to help empower your students to understand a lot of the minefields that exist around some of these complex topics. Fair enough? So, let's talk about an introduction to investing. Investing is the process of allocating money or resources to an asset, venture, or project with the expectation of generating a return or profit, okay? So how many of you guys have like an investing class that you teach your students? Just a handful of you? Okay. So how many of your students come in and say things like, I want to buy GameStop or I want to buy Bitcoin, right? Right? Pretty general across the board. Why is that?
It's the most popular things right now.
It's the most popular things. And the more that you guys can help them avoid the hot dot syndrome, the better they're gonna be in the long run, okay? Now, I deal with retirees every single day, and it's shocking the number of retirees who are having the same conversation with me of, well, I wanna start investing in cryptocurrency, or I wanna start investing in the hot stock of the day. And don't get me wrong, sometimes the hot stock's actually good company, but teaching them the underlying fundamentals as to why that might be the case helps them understand the reasoning behind it and make empowered and informed decisions. So as they're beginning to invest, help them understand what makes a company good, what makes a company of the long-term perspective. A lot of times people have the misconception that investing is just gambling. Is that the case? So somebody break it down in the most simple terms for me. What is my objective when I'm investing in the stock market, for example? Come on. What was that?
Long-term outcome.
Long-term outcome, right? And you're right, it depends. You can definitely have a bogey that floats around. But the objective here is to buy good long-term companies that you have faith in, right? This isn't necessarily to be the active day trader. Let's talk about why this is important. So first and foremost, everyone needs to understand that there are risks associated with this and that there are returns associated with this. Now, any singular investment carries its own weight and own risk, but if you're carrying the time horizon on your side, knowing that you have the long-term outcome, the difference is going to be kind of there. So let's talk about this and why time horizons are so important. Anyone recognize what hike this is? Angel's Landing. Okay. Now, when I was 18 years old, this is, unfortunately can't see this. This right here, that Yahoo is me. My friends and I did this hike as part of our senior trip. Okay. Now, candidly, we ran this hike very quickly. This guy right here, you can't see here, but he has slippers on. We did the entire hike up and down in about 45 minutes. And we got to the top there, and we're right there at the edge. Thank you. And my toes were hanging over the edge, and I'm sitting there just laughing with my buddies, just being stupid, right? That's how you are when you're 18 years old, is there's nothing happening. Flash forward about 4 years ago, we took our two oldest kids, our other ones weren't born then, but we had Beckham and Boston with us, and we did arches. Has anyone done this hike? Now, if you were to contrast this hike with Angel's Landing, which one is the more difficult or the scarier hike? By a country mile, not even in the same ballpark, right? This is a very easy leisure hike. My stress level was a 15, okay? Every time I let my son Beckham out of his little carrier there, he's 3 years old at this point, he would wander off. And mind you, that hike, you've got a football field of room to make sure you're not next to a cliff, but I'm like playing defense the entire time, like you're not going anywhere. Why is it that my 18-year-old self was able to dangle my toes over the side of that cliff, run up Angel's Landing in flip-flops and slippers, and when I was in my early 30s, with this hike, I was at a stress level 10. What changed? My responsibility, my accountability, and my life, the time of my life changed, okay? So as you're talking to your students about investing, understand this concept, right? Just because they have a long-term perspective doesn't mean that you can always just set a stock and forget it. You have to consistently be reevaluating where you're at. And as you guys are getting into your own financial literacy for retirement as well, the same concept yields true. As you start getting closer to that retirement window, you start decreasing your risk and making sure that your nest egg is safe and secure, okay? So anyone know what the rule of 72 is? Want to explain it to us?
It's how long it'll take for an investment to double in value.
Perfect. So we have the example here. If the annual growth rate is 8%, the investment will double in approximately 9 years, okay? So now, Rule of 72 has proven time and time again to help people understand the power of compounding interest. Albert Einstein described compounding interest as the eighth wonder of the world. So the Rule of 72 helps investors understand the impact of compounding and the time it takes for the investments to grow. The Rule of 72 assumes a constant annual growth rate, which may not be entirely accurate for real-world investments. The Rule of 72 can also be used to calculate other factors such as the rate of inflation needed to have the purchasing power of any given period. Okay, so an exercise that I highly encourage you guys take your students through will be the following. So this is on Dave Ramsey's calculator on his website. Take your students through this, okay? If we look at this and we say that you have your 16-year-olds in your class, okay? They plan to retire at the age of 67. They have $0 starting out today. And they're gonna contribute $50 per month. And they're gonna track an annual rate of return of 10%. When run out, they have close to $1 million when it comes to retirement, okay? That's at $50 per month. Now, the crazy part is the total contributions at that rate were $30,000. $926,000 of that is growth. And that's the power of compounding interest. So this is where I would like to tell you the following, okay? Timing the market is not as important as time in the market, right? So rather than having your students try and chase the hot dot, help them understand that time on their side allows them to experience a lot more potential upside and future growth. Questions here? Yes.
When we're running this and you put 10% as an annual return, like what's realistic for us to show our kids? Because I like to show them the big one because like, look what you could do. You want to get them excited. Like realistically, is 10 a long term?
Yeah, so according to the S&P 500, this is Ramsey's website, not mine. So if he's wrong, blame Ramsey, not me, right? This is the return your investment will generate over time. Historically, the 30-year return of the S&P 500 has been roughly 10 to 12%.
Sometimes pretty.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's going to be blips along the way. And I think if we take the 20-year average apart from last year, it was closer to 7.5%. But when you calculate back in last year's returns in the S&P 500, you get right back up there to 10, maybe even 12%. Okay.
Another thing is I have students that don't believe me either, even though, and so I'm like, fine, do 8%, and like,
It's still
but it's still good.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
and
how I
so,
usually do 8,
yeah.
10, but I feel guilty almost showing them 10 because I'm like,
no,
oh my gosh.
I've
but
got,
like they don't believe you either.
I've got a slide from New York Life that goes through the stock market rate of returns since 1923. And so it actually shows the percentage of returns in each year, and 71% of the time, it's more than it has a return.
So,
Lots of graphs out there.
so the most important thing is time in the market. And then the second concept is what's referred to as dollar cost averaging. Does anyone know what that is, dollar cost averaging?
So it's where instead of investing $1,000 at once, you take $100 and you invest it over a certain set period of time into that same. So you're actually averaging what you're buying. So if the market's up, you're buying less. If the market drops, you're buying more shares.
That's exactly right. So if we look at the S&P 500 and we say that there's going to be returns that look like this, okay? The concept of dollar cost averaging is every 2 weeks, regardless of what's happening in the market, I'm going to set a dollar amount and pick my interval and just average my way in. So I'm going to buy the peaks and the troughs. And what ends up happening is my overall return over the investment timeline allows me to average the highs and the lows, okay? And so this is a really, really important concept, and everyone does it with their 401ks without even realizing it. But if you're going to start investing some money of your own without a 401k, it's important that you understand that set it and forget it's great, but even more important is also the concept of buying with every single interval, right? Dollar cost averaging your way there. Okay.
Yeah, and you're not trying to time the market with that. You're just setting a time frame and you're buying it in this time frame.
That's exactly
No
right.
matter where the market's at. Sometimes you'll buy high, sometimes you'll buy low.
That's exactly right. So investing principles, start early and be consistent. Always do your research. Maintain a long-term perspective like you mentioned. Don't chase the hot dot, okay? Don't be subject to one of these people that just always is constantly going out there. And then consistently make sure you're monitoring and rebalancing the portfolio contingent to the time of your life and the desires therein.
Leave it in there.
That's exactly right. Set it and forget it, okay? So Charles Schwab ran the study several years back. When markets dip, don't drop out. So they ran this with 3 different types of investors. They had the stalwart, the reactor, and the waffler. Each investor saved the same amount annually and had identical starting allocations. So what made the difference in their ending wealth? The way they behaved during bear markets. So we have the waffler who would put money in and then pull it out, consistently trying to time the market, right? So you can see here that every single time the market would start rallying, they'd buy back in, and whenever it would dip, they'd drop out. And what ended up happening is they mistimed the market oftentimes because it's impossible to know what's going to happen, and they ended the study with about $615,000. You have the reactor who has too much risk. They see something like a 2008 happen with a pullback, they get scared, and they go into a straight income fund. They guaranteed losses and ended the study with about $484,000. Now what's crazy is you have the stalwart investor who set it and forgot it and never looked at it, okay? In that same time frame, they did not do anything and they ended with $1.1 million. Meaning what?
Put it in, leave it in.
They didn't even look at the news.
Time in the market is more important than timing the market, okay? If you had your crystal ball in front of you and you could perfectly predict every single time it's going to drop and every single time it's going to go back up, then by all means, go do it. Those of us who do not have said crystal ball, it's a lot better to ride the curves and understand that we're going to buy low and we're going to buy high, and that as we go through the course of history, we're going to get closer to our end objective. What a lot of times we end up seeing, is that people like to repeat this process. They like to buy when the stock is high, they like to sell when the stock is low, and they repeat this process until they're broke, okay? Do not let this be your objective. Okay, so let's transition into longevity risk. Okay, so as the name portrays, what does it mean when I say longevity risk?
Outliving your money.
The risk of outliving your money, okay? So this is Mount Everest, and since they've been recording expeditions to the top of Mount Everest, there have been roughly about 212 fatalities, okay? Now what's interesting about this statistic is that 32 of those fatalities happen on the way up, and 180 of those happen on the way down, okay? So almost 6 times the number of people are dying on the way down and then on the way up. So what would cause such a massive discrepancy? Why is it that so many more people are dying on the way down than on the way up?
Focus, balance, they're tired.
I think all these play into the exact same perspective, which is what was their main objective when they started this journey? They wanted to summit Mount Everest. What should their objective truly have been?
Survive my home.
Get back to the car. Come on, right? And way too often, a lot of times people view retirement in this exact same lens where it's saying, well, I'm going to save up $1 million. Well, what's magical about $1 million, right? Or I'm going to keep working until I'm 65 years old and I'm going to turn on Social Security and Medicare. What's magical about those things, right? What really matters is that we have enough reserve assets to make sure that we can maintain our standard of living, which means 2 very important things, I guess 3. One is that we are living within our means, okay? So as we start developing behaviors, these behaviors are gonna start happening for your students today, right? When they make $20 from their job, they need to learn that of that $20, realistically, maybe 5 or 10 of that they should be spending. The rest of it should be going for taxes, for saving, for any other number of things. And it should not be $20 in is $20 out, okay? Because then if you save up your $1 million and your lifestyle requires $250,000 a year to live off of, guess what? You have to adjust in retirement, okay? The next one would be when you ask a group of senior citizens, what do they fear most, outliving their money in retirement or death? What do you guys think they said? It's crazy that 70% of Americans have a greater fear of outliving their money than they do of dying, okay? Why is that the case?
Planning's the most difficult part.
Absolutely.
You know how much you're gonna need. I mean, we're kind of in, I'm in this situation now. My wife just retired, 34 years of teaching. She just called it a career. And we're like, okay, where's her retirement at this point? I mean, I still got 4 years to go, but where are we at? And it kind of gave us a real gut check as to see where we were. Will we have enough? Do we have enough? Are expenses in order? Do we have everything paid off? Will we have everything paid? It makes you ask a ton of questions, so that fear rises.
Exactly, and a lot of people blindly enter in thinking, I'm getting to retirement and now I'm done, without understanding the entire back half of this mountain still exists. And so the idea that we die, it's permanent. The idea that we run out of money, that's difficult. That's saying I have to now alter my standard of living in retirement, okay? Top ramen was bad enough the first time around in college. Don't repeat that process, guys.
Well, you can't really go back to work at that stage.
Exactly.
It's like when you're my age, you can always, go do a job or something, but when you're in your 80s, that's it, that's all there is.
No, and we saw this all the time where people would be, driving the shuttle bus at the car dealership or being a greeter at Walmart, not out of desire, but out of pure necessity to have some source of income, okay? And here's the big problem. The average 65-year-old male in the US is expected to live to be age 86.6, and his female counterpart is expected to live to be age 88.8. Now, the hard part about this is when you're talking to your students, what do you guys tell them the life expectancy is? Do you guys know? Yeah. So the problem is that people have this misconception in their mind, well, where average life expectancy in the US today is mid to early 70s. But the problem is when we look at mortality tables, when the group of people who makes it to 65, the bogey gets pushed out, okay? Meaning that a 65-year-old is gonna live to be age 86, whereas a 2-year-old baby might live to be in their 70s, right? And so this is the problem with longevity, is you may not have enough resources in your backpack to plan for that. So, I swear I have a slide here, there we go. We have to address this mathematically. And the way that we properly plan for longevity risk is with the following. We look at their lifetime income, okay? So those of you who are teachers that still qualify for pensions, this is where your pension comes into play, okay? Another source of lifetime income is what? Social Security, okay? Those are the two primary sources of lifetime income. We take our lifetime income and we adjust that with what's called the cost of living adjustment. From there, we're going to add back in our reserve assets, our IRAs, our 401ks, our 403bs, our TSPs, and we have those adjusted for investment return because they're not staying stagnant. From there, we have to take our regular consumptions, our bread, milk, and eggs each month, helping maintain our standard of living. And then we have to adjust that number for inflation, okay? Heaven knows those bread, milk, and eggs aren't going to stay consistent all throughout retirement. 12 months ago, that was cheaper than it is today, right?
They're not gonna stay with the COLA either. They're not gonna equal those out.
That's such a good point, okay? So when we look at a 20-year average on a COLA, we're between 2 and 2.5%. 20-year average on inflation, you're 3 to 3.5%, okay? Meaning what?
Inflation goes faster than the increase.
Within 5 or 10 years in retirement, there's going to be a massive gap between those two numbers. And so if your lifetime income is your sole source of income, you have to reevaluate and say, hey, I might not actually have enough to make sure that I'm getting there. From there, we take out our large withdrawals, that trip that you've been putting off to Hawaii, the new roof on the house, taxes, and any long-term care. And if at the passing of both spouses there is a surplus, then you've properly accounted for longevity risk, okay? Questions on this equation? Now, obviously, there's a lot of variables going into this, but as you guys have students who are getting closer to, trying to understand what they need, this helps put it into their mind saying, I don't know if Social Security is going to be there for me. So I have to increase my reserve assets, meaning I might need to be saving more today, and that power of compounding interest conversation comes into play. Yes, please.
I do have a question. Do you happen to know the retirement calculator from Ramsey? Is it the same formula, right?
It's a similar one. I don't know.
I'm assuming it is, but I just I'm like maybe he knows before I go look.
His is really just time value of money calculation.
Okay.
It's pretty cut and dry.
Basic?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So this is important. For the visual learner and those who have visual students, I like to address it this way. We have the Anderson household and we say that they have a standard of living. We'll call that $10,000 per month to maintain their standard of living. That's to pay their mortgage, that's to pay their cars, their utilities, to buy the bread, milk, and eggs. And I have this depicted as going into a garbage can because this is money that once spent, it's gone, it's not reinvested, okay? So they have some lifetime income sources. Maybe they get pensions and Social Security to the tune of $7,000, okay? Well, if they require $10,000 a month to live off of and they're bringing in $7,000, what happens?
Bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Just put it on a credit card, let someone else deal with it, right?
Yeah, it can burn after
Just
once you're
kidding.
dead, right?
That's exactly right. No, ideally, the Andersons have some reserve assets that they can draw on, okay, to maintain the standard of living. The risk with longevity is that we deplete those reserve assets, and now we have to alter that standard of living to maintain our lifestyle, okay? Again, downsizing the house, selling one of the cars, stop eating out, start buying generics instead of brand names, okay? You don't want to have to enter into that equation that far into retirement. You want to maintain your standard of living. So again, the principle that needs to be taught to your students at this point is, as you guys are gearing up for the real world, live within your means. Just because you make more money doesn't mean you need to necessarily go turn around and spend more money, right? If you can learn to live off of a percentage of your income early on, you're gonna have a vastly different situation, okay? Whenever I talk to my clients, the happiest clients I have in retirement are my school teachers and my government employees. Why is that? Absolutely. The pension's a huge deal, and I'm not gonna sidestep that.
Because they learn to live on little.
They learn to live on less. And then in retirement, with the pension and the 401k, and Social Security coming in, they oftentimes have this conversation of, wait, we can spend more money now? And it's like, yeah, you actually have a little bit more ability. And I would say 9 out of 10 teachers still say, not gonna do it. I'm not gonna fall for that one, Ben. So, this is the big concept, okay? Live within your means, spend less money than you make. Learn to live on a percentage, and then you can properly plan for longevity risk, understanding that those reserve assets will help carry you through all the way through the rest of your life. Survivorship risk. Inevitably, one of the two of them is gonna predecease the other. So in this situation, we look at that $10,000 a month. That rarely, if ever, changes. That's going to be the cost to maintain the household, regardless of if one predeceases the other. And a lot of times people try and challenge me on this, but the reality is, your mortgage, doesn't matter if one person lives in the house versus two. If you're driving a car, the gas doesn't matter if there's one person in the car versus two. Even things like groceries, 1 versus 2 is roughly the same number.
Well, because you're gonna eat out more, because you're by yourself.
You're going to offset your standard of living, absolutely. What we oftentimes see is that this number sometimes increases, but things like pensions and Social Security, they get affected. So depending on how the pension was elected, it could potentially go away, okay? Things like Social Security, guaranteed one of the two drops away, and it's always the lower of the two benefits, meaning that we could find ourselves in a position where our income is now $4,500 a month, our standard of living hasn't changed, and now we accelerate the rate at which we deplete this, okay? Meaning that we have to properly plan for that, making sure that we plan for the potential death of a loved one. Yes, please.
My father passed away just over a year ago, so this was the first year my mom filed taxes, and she had to file single.
Yep.
As opposed to Mary filing jointly, so that made a big difference. And she lost his Social Security, but the pension's in her name, so she had to pay for the first time ever after losing my dad. So
Well, last year she passed away? Last year he passed away?
it was, it was November 2022. Yeah.
So she should still, so you talk to your accountant because she should still get 2 tax filing years as a widower status or widow status. Yeah, so she probably has money, just have her file an amended return. Talk to the accountant, he should know. But,
I don't do accounting, but yeah.
no, talk to an accountant though.
So
Yeah.
you can file as a widower, and that is.
For 2 years, you get the same Mary filing joint status. But yes, eventually it goes away. But in her situation, that could be some money back to her pocket. But it's substantially different for 1 versus 2, you're right. And so this is where we start to see the little old lady sell her home, not because she wants to, but because she actually has to, right? Move into the condo, downsize, because she actually has to.
On the Social Security, don't they take the higher one? Like, my mom was able to take my dad's.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, so you keep the higher benefit always. The lower benefit always drops off. And with the pension, it depends on how it's elected.
I'm having a hard time believing someone needs $10,000 a month to live on.
I would
In
hope that their house,
retirement.
I would hope their house would be
That's
paid off
exactly
at
what
that
I'm
point.
thinking. The biggest amount of that's usually a mortgage, and you would think.
If you're still living off the 20.
I don't know how to address this question, but that $10,000 a month is actually
Yes, we're all teachers.
probably pretty low.
That's gotta include taxes and everything else, right?
That's the teacher
Healthcare
mindset
expenses.
going on here. Who needs $10,000 a
Because just
month?
because you get Medicaid doesn't mean your medical is paid for.
Yeah, so
That's true.
there's a lot that goes into this. Health insurance, I mean, the reality is, I don't disagree that $10,000 a month seems like a high number, and a lot of people are like, there's no way. But if somebody got used to making between $1 and $150 in their lifetime, they probably spend more than $10,000 a month. So
As you get older, your healthcare needs are gonna increase.
healthcare, I mean, think about it. Like you go on one trip. I took my kids to Disneyland last week, right?
Hello.
So don't even get me on this tangent, but like one trip to Disneyland, I'm like $4,000 poorer now. I'm like, how on earth did this happen? Where is our society gone? No, like legitimately, you go 3 days of park hopper tickets at Disneyland, and you're more than half that expense. And so like everything costs more money. So my point is like 10,000 might seem like a high bogey. That's fine. Regardless of that, make sure that you're maintaining your standard of living. Whatever that number is for you, make sure you know what it is. So switching gears here, a woman's husband was in freezer for 10 years. Please confirm. This was out here in Tooele. We're just great. Utah's the best. they zoom in the article. One of the possible motives being explored is whether Soren Mathers kept her husband's body so she could still collect his Social Security's and Veteran Affairs checks.
Yeah.
Okay.
What other reason would you have?
Yeah.
So they went to perform a wellness check on her. They found that she had passed away. They went to go clean out her house. They opened up that deep freezer, found her husband's body in there, and they said that they were exploring this. They had a follow-up article here on KSL a couple weeks later that said, upon finding his body, they found a note in his hand that said, if my body is found prior to my wife's passing, please do not hold her responsible. This was my choice. This was my plan, not her doing. The weird part about it was written in her handwriting, but I'm sure it's all above board.
Wait, they didn't find this out until she died, is that what you said?
That's exactly what her plan was. Right? She'd get more money to live on.
That's a
and
good
then-
plan.
Husbands, hear me now, believe me later.
Right, that's the whole-
If your wife turns to you and says, I have a great idea, let's go to Lowe's this weekend and get a deep freezer, run for the hills, okay? No, but this is the problem, is that we look at poverty tables and non-married persons substantially outpace married persons as it pertains as a percent of the population subject to poverty. And you kind of hit the nail on your head with your mom, where all of a sudden you're starting to realize married filing jointly is substantially better tax treatment than single, right? You have two Social Securities versus one. All of a sudden these costs are adding up and you deplete the savings at an alarming rate, okay? So the situation has to be the following. Make sure that you properly account for the loss of an income and loss of a spouse, okay? How are we doing on time? I got 15 minutes left. This is not a plan, okay? So let's shift gears and talk about Social Security really quickly here. Social Security is about as complicated a fiscal system as is humanly possible to design. This is from a Boston University professor of economics. I feel like that's true. How to qualify for Social Security, have to work 10 years or more in Social Security covered employment. The metric that they're going to use is 40 quarters, or have a spouse who's paid into FICA. Okay, you have to be U.S. citizens or permanent legal residents in order to qualify. Okay, so the students are going to say, well, will Social Security even be there for me? Let's be honest. If we were to survey every single person in this room when you guys were in your 20s and 30s, you guys are probably asking the same question.
Yep.
Okay. Inevitably, they're going to figure out a way to punt the ball down the road another 20 years, and the alternative to Social Security is what?
Your kids.
Your kids.
I mean, for the government or for us?
For the government.
Medicaid and food stamps and all that.
That's exactly right. It's welfare. It's welfare. Okay? Which costs more money to administer? Social Security or welfare?
Welfare.
By a country mile. Okay. So being fully pragmatic here,
Maybe they're gonna get a bunch of freezers next.
maybe they're going to get a bunch of freezers. That's probably the best comment I've ever heard. I'm going to pass this around in the interest of time. If you guys do want my slides, you want additional information, including our guidebooks, please fill that out and we'll get that sent over to you. So let's talk about some of the basics of Social Security. So the first is FRA. This is full retirement age. This is the age arbitrarily assigned to you by the US government in which you can take 100% of your Social Security benefits. The next one is your PIA. This stands for your primary insurance amount. And this is probably the most confusing. You don't like me walking right in front of the slide? This is the most confusing acronym as it pertains to Social Security, because everyone thinks, well, what does insurance have to do with this? For a quick history lesson, Social Security was signed into law in 1935. Does anyone know what the average life expectancy was in 1935? 65 years old. So when Social Security was signed into law, the average individual didn't live past 65, so it was actually a life insurance policy put in place essentially to help those who live past life expectancy. So when you see that insurance amount, that's where it dates back to. Today, and as it moves forward, whenever you see PIA, just think of 100% of the benefit if taken at full retirement age, okay? So if I take my benefit at FRA, my PIA is 100%. If I take it earlier, then it's gonna be less than 100%. If I take it later, it's gonna be more than 100%, okay? How can it be more? We accrue what's called delayed retirement credits, or DRCs. Every year that I delay my benefit past FRA, it grows 8% simple interest year over year until it caps out at the rightful age of 70. Now, everyone asks, well, how's Social Security calculated? Okay, again, 10 years to qualify, your 40 quarters, and then they take into consideration what's called your AIM, your average index monthly earnings, where they're gonna consider your top 35 years of earnings, and they're gonna average out your best months across the board, and that's how they determine how much they pay you, okay? So 10 years to qualify, but then it's your top 35 years of earnings. So,
So is that based on your contributions to FICA?
yes,
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm screwed. Because I claim exempt because of where I'm at, so.
yeah. And you'll have windfall elimination,
Oh,
which,
no, I pay FICA, so I exempt on my other taxes, so I'm good.
Okay.
Never mind. I didn't opt out of that,
okay.
I guess.
So in most situations, people ask, what happens if I work 40 years? All that matters is your top 35. So let's say that I'm making more today than I was when I was in my 20s. Those earlier years are going to drop off and be replaced by later, higher earning years. Does that make sense?
And this starts when you're first employed.
The first check paid into FICA. Yep.
So you're
16.
job or whatever.
Correct.
Well,
Yep.
there's a minimum that you have to do though, right? For the qualifications.
Yeah, you have to. So there's a number. I mean,
Yeah.
the number is super small though. Like this year's like $10,000 that you have to earn, but that's annualized. And so if I earn $2,500 in a quarter, I still qualify for that credit, and it contributes towards my overall pie.
Doesn't matter if you don't have 35 years of earnings?
Nope. Nope.
So you just have to have 10, 40 credits.
Yep. 40 quarters is the metric that they care about. Yep. So top 35 years is if you've worked for a long time. If you haven't, then your 40 quarters qualifies you for the program. And then the last one is COLAs. We talked about this. This is cost of living adjustment. Oftentimes when we run the calculation, it never keeps up with inflation. Okay. So early election begins at 62 years old. You're going to receive a percentage of your PIA. You can see here that number is going to be smaller. So if I take it at 62, I'm going to receive 70% of my PIA. That reduction factor is applied from then on, so that doesn't ever change. So if you take it early, then that is a case. The one that's hidden right here conveniently behind this is that there's an earnings limitation of $23,320. If I turn my benefit on and exceed that $23,320, what happens?
You don't get the benefit until.
You're penalized. For every $2 earned, $1 is penalized, and it could be to the tune of the full amount of the benefit eventually. Meaning that I could take my benefit early thinking, well, it might not be there for me and I want to take it today, and I'm going to get 70% of it, but because I earned too much money, I'm not going to actually get a higher amount. And then furthermore, if we're talking about that AIM, the average index monthly earnings, if you're in your retirement years still working, you're probably making more then than you were in your 20s and 30s, right? And so you're also kind of kneecapping your ability to make more money in the long run, which seems silly. It's much better if you're planning on still working to delay Social Security until you actually retire, okay?
What's the
Or at least hit FRA.
FRA and when does it come up?
Yeah, so what year were you born?
67.
So for everyone born after 1960 is age 67. Okay, so between 43 and 54 is age 66, and then from 55 to 59, it's every 2 years past that point, every year past that point, you're gonna add 2 months per year. So if I was born in 1955, my full retirement age is 66 and 2 months, 56, 66 and 4 months, all the way up until 1959 is 66 and 10 months. It's a stupid way they do it, but that's how it's done.
Does it keep going up? Is it 67?
67 is the absolute max today. Will that change? Probably. I was born in the 80s. Inevitably, by the time it comes around to me, it's probably going to be, 67, 68, 69.
To your point, my mom doesn't receive her Social Security benefits for the first 4 months of the year.
Yeah.
They don't kick in until May.
Yep. So early election, if he takes his benefit early at 62 and retires, he's going to get 70% of his $2,000 a month benefit. Makes sense. $1,400 per month. Okay. We've got 7 minutes left, and we've got a lot of stuff. Delaying your benefit past FRA, for every year you delay it, it's 8% growth year over year. It caps out at the age of 70. So if you know people that have delayed it past the age of 70, it probably makes sense just to turn the benefit on. It's in their best interest, okay? Again, delaying it late, you're gonna get that DRC applied 108%, gets you $2,160 per month. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and skip past some of these points. We talked about that. Let's talk about some of the reform proposals. So people are going to say, is Social Security even going to be there for me when I need it? Well, there's a lot of ways that they're keeping the program solvent today, okay? So the House's Ways and Means Committee has been meeting around the clock to discuss different reform proposals to keep the program solvent. Social Security has actually been a lot closer to bankruptcy than it is today. A lot of people don't realize that, but in 1984, it was scheduled to go bankrupt that very next year. And they did some quick accounting and shifted some numbers around and introduced what's called provisional income, which taxed your benefit. And that gave like 35 more years of life to the program. Later, that provisional income was increased under the Clinton administration up to 85%. So right now, 85% of your benefit is subject to income tax. A lot of people don't realize that. So they've talked about increasing maximum earnings subject to Social Security tax. This passed last year. So if I made $160,000 last year, I maxed out my contribution. This year, that's $168,000, meaning that there's a lot more taxable liability for the individual who's making $170,000, for example. They've talked about phasing top earners back into Social Security. This is where you've heard President Biden say, I want everyone to pay their fair share. He's proposing that FICA turns back on at $400,000 and never turns off, meaning that if I made $1 million from $400,000 to $1 million, I'm paying FICA on all that amount. The interesting part about this, and this is 100% apolitical, if that program were to pass, the program remains solvent in its current state without any changes through the year 2100 is what their estimate is. So it would be a lot more tax revenue for Social Security. They've talked about raising full retirement age for those born after 1960. Again, I was born in the 80s. Inevitably, by the time it comes to me, it's going to be 68, 69, or age 70. They've talked about lowering benefits for future retirees, reducing COLAs, and even implementing means testing. This is the scary one for a lot of my teachers. Because the idea is that if I have alternative sources of income, that I might not need Social Security. So if I have a pension, for example, in retirement, I look wealthy on paper. And so they're saying, well, potentially we can cut that out. So there's a lot of people who get mad at all these different topics. I get it. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just here talking about this. So kind of wrapping this back up, and I'm going to buzz through a lot of slides here at the end. Just understand, your students are in a very similar position to where I was, right? Kind of ignorant, not understanding a lot of these concepts. Basic principles of finance will help carry them through all their working career. So if they can learn to live on a percentage of what they make, if they can learn to save more, if they understand what a tax qualified account is, it'll be monumentally beneficial to them in the long run. So I'm going to go ahead and buzz through all this and just end with this slide right here. Somebody is sitting in the shade today because somebody planted a tree a long time ago. Just understand that your students rely on you guys. You guys are kind of the fount of wisdom and knowledge. As you guys come into these conversations, let us know how we can be a resource to you, both from the teacher perspective, but also from an individualized perspective. If you guys want some of these reports run, we do this for free for all teachers. So if this is something that is of interest to you, also go ahead and sign that sheet as it's making its way around. We're here to help you guys out in any way we can. Of all the groups I've presented this information to, you guys are by far the most recent. So for that, I thank you. There we go. It took you guys a minute. No, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.